My photographer father died suddenly, leaving behind a lifetime of memories captured on film. When I developed the last roll from his vintage camera, most photos were beautiful landscapes. But the final frame made my blood run cold. It showed my dad with his arm around a young man who was his spitting image. That photo led me to discover a family secret that changed everything I thought I knew about my father. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, what's your favorite family memory? Drop it in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe for more amazing stories every day. Now, let me take you back to the day I discovered my father's hidden past. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of call that splits your life into before and after. I was in my New York apartment, deep in the dreamless sleep that comes after a 16-hour day of shooting a fashion campaign, when my phone's shrill ring cut through the darkness like a knife. "Karlie?" My mother's voice was barely recognizable, thick with tears and shock. "Honey, I need you to sit down." I was already sitting up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs with the premonition that comes when the phone rings at that hour. "Mom? What's wrong?" "It's your father. Oh God, Karlie, he's gone." The words hit me like a physical blow. My father, renowned landscape photographer Philip Hayes, had suffered a massive heart attack while hiking alone in Yosemite National Park. He was 58 years old, at the peak of his artistic powers, and had seemed invincible to me, a man who could climb mountains with a 40-pound pack of camera equipment and emerge energized rather than exhausted. "The park rangers found him this morning," Mom continued, her voice breaking. "He was on the trail to Glacier Point, the one he'd hiked 100 times before. They said it was quick, that he wouldn't have suffered. His camera was still around his neck." Of course it was. Dad had been born with a camera in his hands, or so it seemed to me growing up. He'd been my inspiration to become a photographer myself, though I'd chosen the commercial world of fashion and advertising over his beloved wilderness. We'd had countless debates about the merits of natural light versus studio strobes, about whether true art could exist in commercial photography, about the soul of an image versus its technical perfection. I said he was doing what he loved, though the words felt hollow. He always said he wanted to die with a camera in his hands. "I know, sweetheart, but that doesn't make it hurt any less." I flew from New York to California in a haze of grief and disbelief, the 6-hour flight feeling both endless and too short. I wasn't ready to face a world without my father in it, wasn't ready to sort through the remnants of a life that had seemed so vital just days before. Dad had been staying at a small cabin he'd rented near Yosemite Village, part of his annual pilgrimage to capture the park in its autumn glory. He'd been making this trip for over 20 years, and I joined him several times as a teenager, learning not just about photography, but about patience, persistence, and the quiet meditation that came from waiting for the perfect light. The park rangers said he was found with his camera still around his neck, Mom said as we drove from the airport to collect his personal effects. Even in his final moments, he was a photographer first. He was so excited about this trip, he said he had some new ideas, some different perspectives he wanted to explore. He had been more energetic lately, more, hopeful about something. Mom had stayed home in Portland, unable to handle the physical demands of Dad's photography expeditions anymore. At 62, she preferred her garden and her book club to sleeping in tents and hiking before dawn. They'd been married for 31 years, and she'd long ago accepted that she would always share him with the mountains and forests that called to his artistic soul. At the ranger station, they handed us a manila envelope containing Dad's personal belongings: his wallet, his watch, his wedding ring, and his prized Leica M6. The camera looked exactly as it always had, its brass body worn smooth by decades of use, but now it carried the weight of being his final companion. "Look at this," I said, holding up the vintage camera that had been his constant companion for over 20 years. "There's still film in it." "The last roll he ever shot," Mom said softly, running her fingers over the camera's familiar contours. Maybe we should develop it, see what he was working on in his final moments. I carefully removed the partially exposed roll of Kodak Tri-X, Dad's preferred black and white film. The roll was about 3/4 finished, which meant Dad had been actively shooting right up until his final hike. As a professional photographer myself, I still maintained a darkroom in my New York studio, one of the few remaining in an industry that had gone almost entirely digital. Dad had taught me to develop film when I was 12, and it had become our special ritual, spending hours in the red-lit darkness, watching images slowly emerge in the developer's solution like magic. "I'll take it back to New York and develop it properly," I said, slipping the film canister into my camera bag. Dad would want it done right, with the care and attention he always gave his work. "He'd like that," Mom agreed. "He always said you had the best eye for printing of anyone he knew." The funeral was held 3 days later at a small chapel in Portland, followed by a celebration of Dad's life at the art museum where his work had been featured in several exhibitions. Hundreds of people came: fellow photographers, gallery owners, ranger parks who had known him from his annual pilgrimages, students he had mentored over the years. Each person had a story about how Dad had influenced their understanding of photography, of nature, of the patience required to capture beauty. "Your father saw the world differently than most people," said Robert Martinez, a photographer who had been Dad's friend for over 30 years. "He could find the extraordinary in the ordinary, the eternal in the momentary. But more than that, he understood that photography was about more than just taking pictures. It was about preserving moments of wonder for future generations." After the service, as I helped Mom sort through the hundreds of condolence cards and letters, I found myself thinking about that undeveloped roll of film waiting in my camera bag. It felt like the last conversation I would ever have with my father, told through the images he had chosen to capture in his final days. A week later, I was back in my New York studio, standing in the familiar red glow of my darkroom. The space was a sanctuary, a place where time moved differently, and the outside world ceased to exist. I designed it myself when I'd first established my commercial photography business, insisting on maintaining the traditional wet process as the industry moved toward digital capture and processing. The familiar smell of chemicals, developer, stop bath, fixer, brought back memories of countless hours spent here with Dad during his visits to New York. He'd been fascinated by my commercial work, even as he gently teased me about selling out to the fashion industry. "There's art in everything, Karlie," he'd told me during his last visit, just 6 months earlier, "even in selling clothes or perfume. The question isn't what you're photographing, it's how you see it, how you make the viewer feel something they didn't expect to feel." I loaded the film onto the developing reel with practiced hands, my movements automatic despite the emotional weight of the moment. This was sacred work, the final collaboration between father and daughter, the last time I would bring his vision to life in the developer. The first few frames that emerged were classic Philip Hayes, sweeping vistas of Yosemite Valley that captured not just the physical beauty of the landscape, but its emotional impact. Half Dome at sunrise, its granite face catching the first golden light of day, the Merced River reflecting autumn colors like a mirror made of liquid silver. Ancient sequoias standing like cathedral pillars in filtered sunlight, their massive trunks disappearing into the canopy above. Each image was technically perfect and emotionally powerful, the work of a master who had spent decades learning to see light the way a musician hears melody. Dad had always been able to find the shot that others missed, the angle that revealed something new about a landscape that had been photographed millions of times. "Beautiful, Dad," I whispered to the empty dark room, my voice barely audible over the gentle hum of the ventilation system. "Just beautiful." Frame after frame revealed the landscape that had captured his heart so many years ago. There was a photograph of Bridal Veil Fall, its mist catching the afternoon light like scattered diamonds. Another showed the granite face of El Capitan, its sheer walls rising impossibly high into his sky dotted with clouds. A third captured a family of deer grazing in a meadow, their graceful forms silhouetted against the golden grass of late autumn.
These were the images that had made his reputation, that had filled gallery walls and coffee table books around the world. But they were also deeply personal, each one a love letter to the place that had shaped his artistic vision and given meaning to his life's work. As I worked through the role, I found myself smiling despite my grief. This was Dad at his best, doing what he loved most, capturing the beauty that most people walked past without seeing. Each frame was a reminder of why he had chosen this difficult, often lonely profession, why he had spent decades chasing light across mountain ranges and desert landscapes. But there was one frame that made me freeze, my hands trembling as I held the print in the developing solution. The image wasn't a landscape. It was a portrait. My father, smiling broadly, his arm around a young man who couldn't have been more than 30. They were standing in front of what appeared to be a coffee shop or restaurant, both of them relaxed and happy, like old friends catching up after a long separation. But it was the resemblance that took my breath away. The young man had Dad's eyes, the same dark brown, almost black, with the same intelligent intensity. He had Dad's nose, strong and straight, and Dad's smile, slightly crooked on the left side, in a way that had always made him look younger than his years. Most striking of all, he had Dad's bone structure, the same angular jaw and high cheekbones that I had inherited as well.
He looked exactly like my father had at that age, like the photos I'd seen from Dad's college years when he was just starting his career as a photographer. The resemblance was so strong it was almost unsettling, as if someone had taken a photograph of Dad from 30 years ago and somehow transported him to the present day. But who was he? And why had Dad never mentioned him? I stared at the photograph for a long time, my mind racing through possibilities. A distant relative? A family friend's son? But the resemblance was too strong, too specific. And there was something about the way Dad's arm rested on the young man's shoulder, something about their body language that spoke of a deeper connection than casual friendship or distant family ties. The photo had been taken recently. I could tell from Dad's appearance, the clothes he was wearing, the slight silver in his hair that had appeared only in the last few years. This wasn't some old family photo I'd never seen. This was from his final trip. I made several prints of the image, studying each one under different lighting, looking for clues. In the background, I could make out what appeared to be a coffee shop with outdoor seating, but nothing distinctive enough to identify the specific location. The lighting suggested it was late afternoon, the golden hour that photographers prize for its warm, flattering quality. "Who are you?" I asked the young man's image, my voice echoing in the empty dark room. "And why didn't Dad ever mention you?" The more I studied the photograph, the more questions arose. The young man was dressed casually, but well, khakis and a button-down shirt that suggested education and employment. He wore a watch that looked expensive, and his posture spoke of confidence and self-assurance. This wasn't a random encounter with a stranger. This was clearly someone Dad knew well, someone he was comfortable with. But in 30 years of life, I had never heard my father mention anyone who fit this description. Dad had been an open book about most things: his work, his travels, his friendships with other photographers and artists. He'd shared stories about the people he met on his journeys, the park rangers who had become friends, the gallery owners who had supported his work over the years. So why had he kept this young man a secret? That night, I called my mother from my apartment, the photographs spread out on my kitchen table under the bright halogen lights. "Mom, I developed Dad's last roll of film today." "Oh, honey, how was it? Were they beautiful?" Her voice was eager, hungry for any connection to the husband she'd lost. "Most of them, yes. Classic Dad. Yosemite at its most magnificent. But there's one photo that's confusing. It's a portrait of Dad with a young man I've never seen before, someone who looks remarkably like him." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, longer than seemed natural for a simple question about a photograph. "Can you describe him?" Mom's voice had changed, become more careful, more guarded. I gave her a detailed description of the young man in the photo, noting the striking resemblance to Dad, the apparent closeness between them, the recent timing of the photograph. I don't know who that could be," Mom said, but something in her voice suggested otherwise. There was a hesitation, a slight tremor that spoke of knowledge being withheld. "Maybe a fan. Your father met a lot of people on his trips. You know how generous he was with his time, especially with young photographers who were just starting their careers." "Mom, this isn't a casual fan photo. They look close, familiar, and the resemblance is uncanny. This young man could be Dad's twin from 30 years ago." "Karlie, I really don't know. Maybe you should just let it go. Your father's gone, and some mysteries are better left unsolved." But I couldn't let it go. The photograph haunted me, the young man's face so familiar yet completely unknown. I was a photographer myself. I understood the language of images, the stories they told beyond words. This photo was telling me something important, something my father had wanted to preserve. The next day, I began going through Dad's belongings I had brought home with me from his cabin, looking for any clue that might explain the mysterious photograph. I found his appointment book with details about shoots, meetings, and travel plans. I flipped through the book looking for any mention of the young man in the photograph. Dad's handwriting was precise and economical, each entry containing just the essential information. Yosemite trip, October 15, 22, was the final entry with a small notation that simply said, M, coffee, 3 p.m. on October 20th, 2 days before his death. M. The young man's name started with M. But that was all I could find in the appointment book. No last name, no phone number, no additional context that might help me identify the mysterious M who had been important enough to warrant a meeting during Dad's final trip. A week later, still thinking about the man in the picture, I decided to look for something in the email box on his cell phone, which I also brought with me among the belongings found. Perhaps it was too much of an invasion of privacy, but I needed to know who that guy was. Going through marketing emails, correspondence with photographer friends, and payment slips, a certain email caught my attention. Sunshine Adoption Services. My hands shook as I read through the email exchanges. "Dear Sunshine Adoption Services, I am writing to inquire about a child I placed for adoption through your agency in March 1993. The birth mother was Elena Rodriguez, and the child was a boy born on March 15, 1993. I've been trying to locate him for several years and would appreciate any assistance you can provide in facilitating contact if he is interested in meeting his birth father. Sincerely, Philip Hayes." March 15, 1993. I did quick math in my head. That would make this child 32 years old now, similar to the age of the young man in the photograph. I found more emails, each one a variation on the same theme. My father had been searching for this son for decades, working with different agencies, hiring private investigators, never giving up hope of finding the child he had given up for adoption 25 years earlier. But why had he given up a child, and why had he never told me I had a half-brother? I kept digging through the inbox, finding more pieces of the puzzle. There were copies of birth certificates, adoption papers, and correspondence with lawyers. Each document painted a picture of a young man who had made an impossible choice, giving up his child in the hope of providing a better life. The birth certificate was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Baby boy Rodriguez Hayes, born March 15, 1993, 7:32 a.m., weight 7 pounds 3 ounces. The father was listed as Philip Hayes, age 25. The mother was Elena Rodriguez, age 22. I stared at the document, trying to reconcile the image of my father as a young man with the reality of what I was reading. The idea of him as a young father making the devastating choice to give up his child was almost impossible to process.
There were legal documents, too. Formal adoption papers that transferred custody of the baby to a family named Anderson in Fresno, California. The adoptive parents were listed as Carl and Joanne Anderson, both in their 30s, both described as financially stable and emotionally prepared for parenthood. I read the document 3 times, tears streaming down my face. This was a side of my father I had never known. But what had happened to Elena? And why had Dad never told me about any of this? I found part of the answer in another email, this one from a private investigator dated just 5 years earlier. "Dear Mr. Hayes," it read, "I have been able to confirm that your son, who was given the name Kevin Anderson by his adoptive family, is alive and well. He is currently 27 years old. He graduated from Fresno State University, where he studied environmental science with a focus on park management. He appears to be a well-adjusted young man who has been told about his adoption but has not actively searched for his birth parents. If you would like me to continue investigating, or if you would like assistance in making contact, please let me know. However, I should warn you that any contact should be handled very carefully, as the young man may not be prepared for or interested in a relationship with his birth father. Kevin Anderson, my half-brother, had a name." I continued searching through the inbox, finding more correspondence that painted a picture of my father's increasingly desperate search for his lost son. There were emails to the university, carefully worded inquiries about a student named Kevin Anderson. There were more reports from private investigators, each one providing small pieces of information about Kevin's life, his academic achievements, his work as a part-time park ranger, his apparent love of the outdoors that so closely mirrored Dad's own passions. And then, at the bottom of the box, I found the letter that changed everything. It was dated just 3 months ago, from the same private investigator who had been helping Dad for years. "Dear Mr. Hayes," it read, "I am pleased to inform you that I have successfully made contact with your son, Kevin Anderson. After careful consideration and consultation with a family counselor, I approached him about your desire to meet him. I am happy to report that he has expressed interest in meeting you and learning about his birth parents. He has questions about you and Elena. He has provided his contact information and has indicated that he would be comfortable with a gradual introduction, perhaps starting with phone calls or texts before moving to an in-person meeting. He is currently working as a researcher at Yosemite National Park, which seems like a remarkable coincidence given your own love of that place. I believe this could be the beginning of a very positive relationship for both of you. Please find his contact information attached and let me know if you need any assistance in facilitating this reunion." Attached was a phone number, an email address, and a recent photograph. It was the same young man from Dad's final roll of film. Kevin Anderson, my half-brother, a researcher at Yosemite, the place where Dad had died, the place he had loved more than anywhere else on Earth. I settled onto the couch, suddenly remembering my own body, my head spinning from the amount of information I had just discovered. My father had had another child, a son he'd given up, and he'd spent more than 30 years trying to find him. He'd finally succeeded, just months before his death. But why had he kept it secret? Why hadn't he told me or Mom about finding Kevin? I found part of the answer in another email. This one from Kevin to Dad, dated just 2 weeks before Dad's death. "Dear Philip," it read, "thank you for your email. I want you to know that I don't hold any resentment about the decision you made. My adoptive parents, Carl and Joanne Anderson, have been wonderful, and they've always been honest with me about being adopted. They've actually encouraged me to reach out to you if I ever wanted to. I'm grateful for the life I've had, but I'm also excited to get to know you and learn about my biological family. I've looked up your photography work online, and it's incredible. I can see where I get my love of nature and the outdoors. I know this is complicated, especially with your wife and daughter not knowing about me yet. I'm willing to take things slowly and let you decide when and how to tell them. I don't want to disrupt your family or cause any problems. I just want you to know that I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. I'm looking forward to our meeting next week.
Thank you for finding me, and thank you for never giving up. Your son, Kevin. My father had been planning to tell us. He'd found his son, built a relationship with him, and was working up the courage to introduce Kevin to the family. But he'd run out of time. I looked again at the photograph, seeing it now with new understanding. This wasn't just a casual meeting. This was a father and son, finally reunited after a life of separation. The joy in both their faces was unmistakable, the love evident in every detail of their body language. But now, Dad was gone, and Kevin was alone again, probably wondering why his newly found father had suddenly stopped responding to his calls and messages. I picked up my phone and dialed the number from the investigator's report. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Hello? Is this Kevin Anderson? Yes. Who's this? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. My name is Karlie Hayes. I'm Philip Hayes' daughter. I think you're my brother. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel his shock through the phone. Karlie? Kevin finally said, his voice thick with emotion. He told me about you. He was so proud of you, showed me your photography work online. He said you were incredibly talented, that you had inherited his eye for composition, but had found your own unique style. But I thought, when he stopped calling, when he stopped responding to my messages, I thought maybe he'd changed his mind about wanting me in his life. Kevin, I have to tell you something. Dad died 2 weeks ago. Heart attack while hiking in Yosemite. I heard a sharp intake of breath, then quiet crying. I'm so sorry, I continued, my own voice breaking. I just found out about you today while digging into his email inbox. Also, I developed his last roll of film. There's a photo of you two together, and I found all his emails, all the evidence of his search for you. He's the man they found some day ago? No one told me. He's really gone? Kevin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I'm so sorry. I can't believe he's gone. I just found him, and now... I know. Kevin, I want to meet you. I know Dad was planning to tell me and my mom. Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on your grief or complicate things for your family. You're not intruding. You're part of the family. Dad spent half his life looking for you. That tells me everything I need to know about how much you meant to him.
We talked for over 2 hours that first night. Kevin telling me about his life, his work at the park, his adoptive family who had loved and supported him. I told him about Gad, about our childhood together, about the man who had been searching for his lost son while raising the daughter he had. He used to take me hiking in Yosemite when I was little, I said. It's ironic that you ended up working there. Maybe it was fate. Maybe, Kevin agreed. He told me he felt drawn to that place, like it was calling to him. Now I wonder if he was unconsciously looking for me all those years, if some part of him knew I was there. What's it like, working in the park? It's incredible. Every day I get to experience the same wonder that your father, our father, captured in his photographs. I collect data about the ecosystem, help preserve the beauty and balance of nature around us, work on conservation projects. It's quite rewarding. Dad would have loved that. He always said Yosemite was the closest thing to heaven on earth. He told me that too, when we met. He said he'd been coming there for 20 years, and every time he felt like he was coming home. Now I understand why. Over the following days, Kevin and I exchanged texts, photos, and long phone calls. He sent me pictures of himself at work in the park. I sent him some of Dad's unpublished photographs from Yosemite, images that had never been exhibited but that captured the intimate, personal relationship Dad had with that landscape. These are incredible, Kevin wrote in one email. I recognize every location, every angle. It's like seeing the park through his eyes, understanding what he saw that made it so special to him. A week later, I flew home and Kevin drove down from Fresno to meet me and Mom in person. I was nervous about how Mom would react. She'd been married to Dad for 31 years and had never known about his first love or the child they had together.
I'd told her about my discovery, about the emails and the photographs, but I wasn't sure how she would handle meeting Kevin face to face. But when Kevin walked into our living room, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers and wearing an expression of nervous hope, Mom took one look at him and burst into tears. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. "You look just like him, just like Philip when I first met him." Kevin was tall and lean like Dad had been, with the same angular features and intelligent dark eyes. But it was more than just physical resemblance. He had Dad's quiet intensity, his way of listening carefully before speaking, his habit of tilting his head slightly when he was thinking. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for the shock of finding out about me this way. I never wanted to cause any pain or disruption to your family." "Don't apologize," Mom said, pulling him into a hug that seemed to surprise them both. "You're Philip's son. That makes you family. That makes me your son, too." Over the following hours, Kevin shared the story Dad had told him about his birth and the impossible decision that had led to his adoption. Dad was 25, a struggling photographer with no clear career path. Elena had been 22, a fellow artist with dreams of becoming a painter. When Elena became pregnant, both sets of parents had pressured them to give the baby up for adoption. He told me that Elena was determined to give me up for adoption, that they wouldn't be able to afford raising me. But he was reluctant. He didn't want to give up. But then Elena died in childbirth. He was devastated and unresponsive for weeks. He ended up signing the adoption document.
"He told me it was the hardest decision he ever made," Kevin said, his voice soft with remembered emotion. "But he thought he was doing what was best for me. He was living in a tiny studio apartment, working minimum wage jobs, barely able to support himself. He wanted me to have a stable home with parents who were ready for a child." "And did you?" Mom asked. "Have a good life?" "I did. Carl and Joanne Anderson were wonderful parents. They never hid the fact that I was adopted, and they always told me that my birth parents had loved me enough to want the best possible life for me. They supported me when I decided to search for my birth parents, and they're excited about meeting all of you." "You really didn't know about anything, Mom?" I asked. "I didn't. When I met your father 2 years later, he was already more structured. He had a secure job at the wildlife magazine that he worked for years later. His work was beginning to be recognized. I believe he threw himself into his work to not think about all the losses he had experienced of Kevin and Elena. He still had the shadow of a man tormented by his past, but as he kept doing the work he loved, and then when Karlie was born, that shadow got smaller and smaller, but I knew it was still there. Today, I see that it was the desire to meet his son again." We spent the weekend sharing stories, looking through photo albums, and getting to know each other. Kevin had Dad's eye for beauty, his love of nature. But he also had a warmth and openness that spoke to the loving family who had raised him. Over the following weeks, Kevin became a regular presence in our lives. He would drive down from Fresno on his days off, helping Mom with projects around the house, sharing stories about his work in the park, slowly becoming the son she'd never had. And I found myself with not just a brother, but a best friend who understood the artistic soul I had inherited from our father. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Kevin said one evening as we sorted through more of Dad's photographs, preparing for a memorial exhibition. "The timing of it all. If he died just a few days earlier before we met, you never would have known about me. But he didn't. He lived long enough to find you, to take that picture, to leave us the clues we needed to put the pieces together. Maybe that wasn't coincidence." 6 months after Dad's death, we held a memorial service for him at his favorite spot in Yosemite, the same place where he'd taken his final photographs. Kevin led us there, using his knowledge of the park. The spot was breathtakingly beautiful, a small clearing that offered a perfect view of Half Dome and the valley below. It was easy to see why Dad had been drawn there, why he'd chosen to spend his final moments in a place of such natural majesty. "He died doing what he loved," Kevin said, as we scattered Dad's ashes near a grove of ancient sequoias. "And he died knowing he'd found me. I think that gave him peace. I had brought prints of Dad's final roll of film,
including that last precious photograph of him and Kevin together. We buried one copy with his ashes and kept the others as treasures, proof of a love that had survived 25 years of separation. "You know what I realized?" I said, as we stood together in that sacred place, the three of us who had become a family through loss and discovery. "Dad didn't just find you, Kevin. He found the missing piece of our family that we didn't even know was gone."
A year after Dad's death, we opened the Philip Hayes Memorial Exhibition at the Portland Art Museum. It featured his life's work, decades of landscape photography that had captured the soul of the American wilderness. But the centerpiece of the exhibition was a small, intimate section called The Lost Frame. It contained just one photograph, that final image of Dad and Kevin together, smiling in the California sunshine. Beside it was the story of how that single frame had reunited a family, how a father's love had reached across decades to bring his children together. "Photography isn't just about capturing what you see," read the placard beside the photo, quoting Dad's favorite saying. "It's about capturing what you feel." This photograph captures the joy of a father reunited with his lost son and the love that never stopped searching for a way home. Visitors to the exhibition often stopped longest at that simple portrait, drawn by the obvious love and happiness radiating from both faces. Many left comments about their own family stories, their own searches for lost connections, their own understanding of how a single photograph could change everything. "Your father would be so proud," Mom said as we walked through the exhibition on opening night, watching people connect with Dad's work and his story. "He is proud," Kevin said quietly. "I can feel it." I looked at my brother, because that's what he was now, fully and completely. And at my mother, and at the photograph that had started it all. Dad's final gift to us hadn't been just the discovery of Kevin, but the reminder that family isn't just about the people you grow up with. It's about the people who belong in your heart, even when you don't know they exist. An absolutely beautiful story about hidden family secrets, the power of photography to preserve love, and how sometimes the most important discoveries come after we think it's too late. What did you think of Karlie's decision to look for her lost brother after her father's death? Share it in the comments below. If this story of lost family, photographic mysteries, and the love that transcends time moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories about the connections that bind us together. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.